Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Senate Committee on Education. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Buck, Senator Doñate, Senator Flores, Senator Hammond, Senator Neal, Senator Titus, Chair Lang.
Here, and please mark Senator Neal absent excused. We have a quorum and we'll welcome our audience here with us. We've had great education meetings thus far, and I know we'll have a great meeting today. And we're very excited for all of you that have joined us both here and on the phones. Just as a reminder, please check your phones. I'm gonna check mine right now, yes, and silence them. If you want to testify in public comment today, we're not hearing any bills today. We're just having a presentation. If you want to testify in public comment today, make sure you sign in over there at the desk so that we know you're here. And if you have any materials in your public comment that you want to have for people, make sure you've printed 10 copies and given them to Louise Bush, our manager. The public comment will be at the end of the meeting. And if you choose, you can submit full comments by writing for your spoken testimony. And committee members will be on their laptops from time to time. Please don't take that as an indication of inattention. They will be looking stuff up that people say to confirm, and it's just not a sign of disrespect or inattention. So with that, we'll move into our meeting, and I'm so pleased to welcome our guest. As I've mentioned before, I was a former teacher in the Clark County School District at Durango High School. And you've all heard about it because it's been in the news lately for not great things, but it really was a great school. And I was a member of the Clark County Education Association, and to have invited them to come here today and speak about education and how they see education in Clark County. And we really look forward to your presentation. So when you're ready, please approach the witness table and you may begin.
Thank you, Chair Lang, committee members. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Marie Nices. I am the president of CCEA, and I'd like to thank you for giving us this opportunity to present. So I'll just go ahead and begin. Yes. All right. So this fall will be my 30th year in CCSD. I've spent my entire career as a teacher working at-risk Title I schools. I chose this path because I wanted to meet the needs of our historically underrepresented students. As the president of CCA, I have the honor of not only advocating for educators, but students as well. Each and every day, I hear the problems our educators are facing. And the bottom line is those problems impact student outcomes, lead to teacher teachers being overwhelmed, and educators leaving the profession. As we were preparing for this presentation, a colleague shared a letter that he sent his administrator. Valley High School teacher Jacob Bigelow submitted his resignation. Jacob was an experienced veteran teacher who taught many years outside of the Clark County School District. Last November, the district recruited him to fill a position. The frustrations Jacob shares in his letter encompass the problems that we face as educators in Nevada. I told Jacob I would share his letter with you in hopes that something can be done to help retain our educators. Jacob's letter gives us a glimpse of the day in the life of an educator. So I'd like to read his letter to you. Hello, I'm writing to inform you of my decision to resign for mental health reasons from my position as a physical science teacher effective immediately. I cannot continue in this position without negatively impacting my mental well-being, and I request for my release from my contract for mental health reasons. The culture of this school is toxic and is not a culture of success. The vast majority of students see the school as nothing more than a place they are required to be for several hours a day, and they think they can do whatever they want while they are here. Too few realize that they have to put in some work to learn and be better prepared for the future. This is not simply a matter of different generations having different perspectives. This is due to a lack of establishing and maintaining a school culture geared toward success. In other schools I have been in, both full-time and substitute teaching, the school culture was geared toward success. The students who wanted to goof off and do nothing all day were not the vast majority of the students, and were recognized by other students as the fools they were acting like. Here, the most popular students are the ones doing the least work and making the most noise while the teachers are trying to convey important information. Here, students seem to revel in not knowing. Here, students seem to take pride in not trying. This is a culture of failing, not learning, not of success. Too many students think that the job of a teacher is to spoon-feed them information to put on the worksheets and tests, and they have no responsibility to learn how to come up with answers themselves. Policies and decisions from the district and/or school admin are not fostering or promoting a culture of success. Student behaviors that would result in suspension or expulsion in any quality school are tolerated as long as the students are safe. Students cheat by copying and pasting from Google or from the example lab reports I wrote to show them. And I'm told that they will get a minimum 50%. Cheating has no penalty, since they get 50% even if they do absolutely nothing. There can be some rationale that justifies a minimum score for missing assignments, but when a student chooses to pass off someone else's work as their own, that should be penalized. Give them a chance to resubmit for an actual score, but don't act as if cheating is no big deal. The overwhelming feeling is that this school is a daycare with books, not a place of education. An excellent example of this was when we had no power recently. Rather than close the school for the day, since we clearly couldn't teach anything with all the students packed into the cafeteria, the decision was made to have the teachers babysit the students in the cafeteria for no other reason than making sure we wouldn't have to make up a day. The contingency days are there in case circumstances prevent learning from happening. It was very clear that learning wasn't happening that day, and the decision not to use a contingency day down the road made it clear that the priority is to babysit, not to educate. I have tried to establish and maintain a learning environment in my classroom, and I am not getting sufficient support from administrators. When a student is continually being non-compliant with classroom policies, they are sent out of the room to the SCC. Other schools I worked at called it in-school suspension. The students usually return with no change in behavior. It seems that unless they damage something or hurt someone, they don't face any real consequences. When one student's escalating behavior ended with this incident where the student threw shoes at me, I did not know if the student was going to return to my classroom after the suspension or not. The smaller interventions along the way did nothing to teach the student that they needed to change their behavior and do their work. When I arrived at the school in November, I was giving some important information, but not all that information that a teacher would need to know to effectively teach their students and follow all school policies. I am still finding new pieces of policies and procedures that no one thought to communicate to me. I had to ask several times to receive a panic button, since no one thought to make sure the new teacher had one on day one. These incidences with individual students, along with their overarching policies and the lack of communication, make it clear that this district and this school does not want highly skilled educators. They want babysitters. I am an educator, not a babysitter, and I cannot continue working at a school where educators are not wanted. I'm caught up with all my grading, and my PLC has all the lessons and worksheets I put together, helping to complete and refine the incomplete curriculum that the district provided. My classroom keys are on my desk next to the district-issued laptop and panic button. I do still want to teach. I just simply cannot continue to try teaching at Valley High School, which is why I'm requesting a release from my contract before the toll on my mental health caused me to lose my passion for education. Thank you, Jake Bigelow. This letter, as an educator, is upsetting to me. I should never have had to share his letter with you. But his resignation is not an isolated incident. Since the start of the school year, we have lost 500 educators. It is one thing to say the district has no control over the number of applicants or the number of qualified educators in the pipeline. We get that. But what they do control is who stays and who goes by the type of support and environment they create. CCSD began the school year with over 2,500 vacancies. Despite continued efforts to hire, we still have hundreds of vacancies. Thousands of students will have the entire school year without a licensed qualified educator. That is unacceptable. I regularly meet with educators like Jacob who are ready to leave the profession. If we are to improve education in Nevada, we must do everything possible to retain our educators. We must hold district leadership accountable and strive for better student outcomes. Otherwise, we fear that this historic investment in education will have little impact on improving education in Nevada. Thank you, and now I will turn it over to my colleague, Francesca.
Thanks, Marie. For the record, my name is Francesca Petrucci. We'd like to thank Chair Lang as well as members of the committee for the opportunity to speak today. And we're going to give an overview of school conditions and recommendations to improve outcomes. Now, we're not going to spend too much time on this because this is the stuff that you hear all the time. Too many teacher vacancies, class sizes are too large, salaries are too low, too much administrative burden on educators, not enough social workers, counselors, school psychologists. Our schools aren't safe, and too many schools have bad school climates. Now, this is the obvious, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we think that the real indicator of what's going on in these schools is this. So in front of you, you have the proficiency levels for the 2021-2022 school year. CCSD elementary schools, 65,000 students were assessed. In math, a little over 30% of students are proficient. In reading and writing, a little over 40% of students are proficient. We go to middle school, 66,000 students assessed, a little over 22% proficient in math, a little over 40% proficient in reading and writing. Now, it's important to put this into context, right? So down in Clark, we have over 300,000 students. Over 2/3 of that population is Title I. So if we take out the Title I schools and compare it to the non-Title schools, you get a deeper picture into what's going on here. So you have Title I elementary school proficiency, about 23.5%. It's about half the proficiency of our non-Title schools. Middle school, 15% math proficiency. It's less than 0.5% of our non-Title schools. High schools, 11% math proficiency. It's about 1/3 of our non-Title schools. Again, over 2/3 of our population down here is Title I. We go to reading and writing. Similar trends persist. About 33% of our elementary school students proficient in ELA versus 58.3% in non-Title. And you can see the trends all the way down to high school. We come to graduation rates. CCSD boasts a high graduation rate of about 80%. However, if you take the magnet and CTE population out of that equation, you get a graduation rate of a little under 70%. Coming into high school, all juniors are required to take the ACT. These are folks who are getting ready to graduate, going to higher ed, heading into the workforce, heading into a trade. And the test for proficiency in math and ELA. You can see here, under 20% of our students at their junior year are proficient in math, 44% proficient in ELA. Now, we believe that money should lead to outcomes, and we think it's important to talk about what money we've received, where it is, and what it's doing. So starting with the federal relief funds, because of the COVID experience, the state received about $1.5 billion in federal relief funds. $765 million of that has been used. About half remains unused. Looking at CCSD alone, CCSD received $1.2 billion in federal relief funds. $682 million has been used, and a little less than half remains unused. And about 40 cents on every dollar of the money used went to address learning loss. Carryover dollars. So in Clark County, we have a unique experience. After 4 years of the reorg law, which gave principals autonomy to control the budget and plan of operation of the school site, $205 million has accumulated in school bank accounts collecting interest. There's projected to be an additional $65 million for the next year. So we're talking about $270 million in carryover funds sitting in school bank accounts. And where is that money? 84% of those dollars, of elementary school carryover dollars, are in Title I schools. 80% of middle school carryover dollars are in Title I schools. 74% of high school carryover dollars are in Title I schools. And if you remember from the previous slide, these are the schools with the lowest proficiency in math and reading and writing, yet they have the highest amount of carryover money. The governor's budget. We're thankful to Democratic leadership for the new funding formula, which dedicates additional money to some of our most at-risk students. And it goes without saying that the governor's proposed budget invests a historic amount into our K-12 system. So on average, we're going to be able to, CCSD will be able to raise the base per pupil amount by about $2,000 per student. And they'll have an additional $600 million toward those weights, which again are geared toward some of our most at-risk students. And this is over the biennium. So CCSD will be flush with funds. In the next biennium, $636 million in new funding for the base, $620 million in new funding for the weights, $270 million in carryover dollars, and $583 million of unused federal relief funds, totaling a little more than $2.1 billion. Now again, we believe that money should lead to outcomes. So we're going to dissect each part of the education delivery system and give some recommendations, starting with the point of instruction, which is the educator in the classroom, the head of the education delivery hub, which is the principal, the superintendent and central administration, which directs each education hub, and the school board governance, which operates as the check on the entire thing. So starting with teachers, you get what you pay for. It's no secret that we're in a nationwide educator shortage. CCSD is competing with several Western United States to retain and attract teachers. And so our salaries and benefits have to remain competitive in order to do that. We need an effective educator in every classroom to make sure that these kids are learning. And we believe that it's the responsibility of the state to develop a strategic educator pipeline to build our workforce in this area and make sure we have enough educators to meet the need. In CCSD alone, over the next 10 years, we're going to need 14,000 educators. We need to raise the standard of the practice to make sure that the most qualified people are in front of these kids. We need more instructional time for students and less administrative burdens like testing and paperwork that takes away from instructional minutes. And we need more support systems for success, professional development, wraparound services for some of our most at-risk kids, and more other licensed professionals. Principals, as mentioned, it's been 4 years of the reorg law where principals have had control over the budget, the plan of operation, and the selection of staff. But this has come with no accountability, which has led to zero improved student outcomes. We believe that we need guardrails to ensure carryover dollars are used for instruction in the year that they were carried over. And we need to hold principals to not just the high standard, but the highest standard of accountability when it comes to improving student outcomes. Superintendent and central administration. You've had superintendents come before you, as well as representatives from the Department of Ed, asking for more money, but they have not given a plan as to how that will improve our student outcomes. And we believe that before the next school year starts, we need a plan that, one, shows how new funding for the base and weights will be used, and two, shows how CCSD will use those funds to improve student outcomes. And with little confidence in central administration, we believe that CCSD should be given 1 year to demonstrate progress or be put into receivership. And school board governance. We're dealing with one of the largest operating budgets in the state, and we believe that we need people who are focused on student outcomes, and that may require modifying our current school board governance to bring that level of expertise to the board. And with that, I will turn it over to our executive director, John Villardita.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for inviting us to give this presentation, and members of the committee, many of which I've worked with in previous legislative sessions. So I think it's really important for all of you to understand where we're coming from. We were asked to come and present and give some recommendations from our perspective, our experience in the education space down in Clark County School District. And we were asked at a time that we think is of historic importance, and that's the type of investment that we're about to see in K through 12 in this state that we haven't seen in a very, very long time, and maybe not at all. Over $2 billion being invested in our new funding formula, fully funding the education stabilization account in case there's a downfall, the weights, particularly ELL students and at-risk students, being fully funded, unprecedented. And so our concern moving forward, because CCA plays the long game, we know how difficult it is in the state of Nevada to move the needle to improve public education. And every time we're involved, we try to be very pragmatic, work with both parties, try to assess what can we get accomplished in a session, because when that session ends, we live with those outcomes for 2 years. So in that context, this time, we're very concerned about the type of investment being made and whether or not, if that money is not being used appropriately, we'll see the type of outcomes that the state, students and parents, educators need to see. In fact, we would go as far as to say it is so serious in our opinion that the stakes are so high that the level of accountability should match those stakes. And when I say the stakes are so high, what kind of conversation are we going to have 2 years from now if we see the same results in student outcomes that we're seeing today? Because what this presentation has, it presents a record of spending, a record of federal relief dollars spending, a record of the $500 million that was put in the last biennium in our funding formula, a record of how carryover dollars have been spent or not spent. And what that record demonstrates is student outcomes, proficiency levels. Now we're going to hear, and you'll hear, oh, it's COVID. We're not going to disagree that there was an adverse effect on our education of our students because of what COVID did. But that's all the more reason we need to know how these dollars are going to be spent moving forward. Now we know in the education space, it's not a light switch where all of a sudden a student is a wizard in algebra. And that's why we have 12 grades, right? It's the culmination of that educational experience that produces the type of student that hopefully is part of the workforce for tomorrow. But what we can measure in shorter increments is how that money is spent. And if it's spent on proven programs that have a track record of outcomes. For example, when we hit a recession in this state, 2009, 2010 special session, $1 billion cut out of education, slow crawl back up to recovery. And the first investment in 2013 that this legislature, and at the time Governor Sandoval, made was, let's do what little money we have, let's do it prescriptively. And it was called categoricals. Zoom, for example, was born. Later, Victory. Later, AB 178 came out of it. And the idea behind that money was you got to spend it this way. You got to spend it this way. So out of that experience, clearly some of those programs demonstrated outcomes. So for example, in all those Title I schools, all those kids that are affected in those schools on that slide that you saw, why can't that money be used to set up after-school reading programs or tutoring programs for math? When you invite school districts to present to you what they think this, opportunity that we have before us can be used, it's not on us to be here presenting the type of programs that the state should adopt or these districts should adopt to improve student outcomes. This is the responsibility of school districts. Clark is unique. Clark is very unique in the sense that we passed AB 469 in 2017. That was the reorganization of the school district, and that came out of a theory that said, geez, a top-down, centralized model isn't producing the results. Let's give autonomy to the hub of delivery, and that's the school. And in that, we gave them the authority of the budget, the authority of the plan of education, the authority to select staff. We empowered the principal with that authority and that responsibility. 4 years later, the math speaks for itself, and we have this ungodly amount of money sitting that should and can be used in the immediate, real time to improve a student's educational experience with programs that we don't have to necessarily invent, with programs that we've seen over the last several years that have delivered results. So the purpose of the Clark County Education's presentation to this Education Committee today is we have concerns that we're not hearing enough detail and plans around how we're going to use this money to improve student outcomes. How we're going to use this money on programs, on strategies that will improve student outcomes. And we're not suggesting that, like I said earlier, it's a light switch and then all of a sudden a kid is educated in 1 year. But we can clearly make a case that if there's not a plan in place before that school year starts around how this money's going to be used, then the chances are that money's not going to be used effectively around programs or strategies to improve student outcomes. And that's why we've advocated 1 year. And if it's not done in 1 year, we're open to an alternative, and that's why we proposed receivership. With that, I will close, Madam Chair, and if there's any questions that the committee may have, we're here to try to answer.
Thank you so much, and I'm sure members of the committee have questions because I have a lot of questions. So if you're all okay, I'll just start with a couple questions and then we'll go from there. So I was really interested in the outcome slide that you had, and I look at the outcomes in correlation to the amount of money that's sitting in schools. And I'm wondering if you have any detailed data that would say the schools that are appropriately using that money and funneling it back into student program at their schools, are their outcomes higher than the schools that are not?
John Velardita. Madam Chair, that's a good question, and I think that is something you should be asking the school districts, right? Particularly Clark. We know that there are some exceptional schools where there have been some very significant improvements, but I think the overwhelming majority are reflected in these slides that capture the 21-22 school year.
Okay, thank you. And I wish they would come back here so we could ask them those questions. So are the low proficiency schools have the highest, it's a different way of asking my same question, I guess, but do the lowest proficiency schools have the highest carryover dollars? Is that what you're seeing?
Francesca Petrucci for the record. Yeah. So the slide, both slides 4 show the difference between title and non-title. And then slide 8 shows the amount of carryover dollars in relation to where they're being housed. So 84% of elementary school carryover dollars are in Title I schools, 80% of middle school carryover dollars are in Title I schools, 74% of high school carryover dollars are in Title I schools. And those are our lowest performing schools.
Thanks, I just wanted to make sure that's on the record. Okay, I'm going to take a couple questions from the committee, and then I probably have some more. Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question, and thank you for coming to the table with some solutions and some observations. And it's not just, we all know there's not, I think, a professional group in the state that are paid enough. And teachers, we've heard that and we've heard that. So thank you so. And yes, that's real for you, but it's so much bigger. So I really appreciate how genuine you are with that, and also coming with some solutions of your own and some ideas. I'm concerned also about the accountability piece. You know, you acknowledge that our governor has recommended a significant increase in budget to education, and you're sitting here asking, hey, where's the accountability? Where's that money going to go? We know that some of it's projected to salaries, but that's not going to solve it, nor will it bring that teacher who is just frustrated back. So I absolutely appreciate that. My question is, I think you should absolutely hold principals accountable. I think you should hold superintendents accountable, and I've asked for some data on what those folks are making and where's their accountability, so thank you for bringing that piece up. What I'm missing, and I didn't hear you say, is student accountability and parental accountability, and I think that's the disconnect. One of the disconnects for me is the students, there's no accountability. Growing up in my little small town in Smith Valley, man, if I got in trouble at school, I got in more trouble at home. And my mother knew about it before I ever got home. And so it's that the piece that we're missing is that parental student connection with the system, and any ideas along how you manage that, because without that buy-in from parents, you're not going to get buy-ins from the students. I mean, I think half the time the parents yell at you if you discipline their kids. I don't know what that solution is. I'd love to hear some ideas how we can help you along that component.
Always the, John Velardita for the record, Senator Titus, always the tough questions come from you.
Mr. Valadita, could you please just say your name for the record?
John Velardita.
Did I miss it? Sorry.
Yeah, I did, but I don't mind. You know, that's a tough question, and I can tell you that it's worse in these schools, particularly since COVID, and particularly since we're seeing an unprecedented level of behavioral issues, from, you know, very mild stuff to very violent things, right? And so we're not here in this session advocating particular legislation around what role parents can play. We believe there are parent organizations and they should be, you know, advocating that. But we do know that the system is broke in the sense that the moment a child enters into a school system, there should be an understanding, a covenant, if you will, between that parent and those caretakers of that education, and that's not there.
Follow-up, Madam Chair? And I thank you for that. We have, my husband and I, between us, we have 9 grandkids with 2 more baking right now, soon to be on the way. They're throughout the school systems in this great state of ours. We have kids in my little home at Smith Valley, grandkids going there, kids in Washoe County school systems, kids in Winnemucca, Humboldt County, and then we have ones in Clark County going to the school system there. One of my granddaughters was attacked in school, and you know, my stepdaughter was down there immediately, you know, as a responsible parent, but there was no recourse, and we're concerned about that. You know, we're concerned as grandparents and of these kids. Are we putting our kids at risk? So thank you for bringing that up. Not only are teachers frightened by what's going on, but students are frightened about the lack of control for that. So again, I hear what you're saying. I so appreciate you advocating for your careers, for the students, and again, being at the table with some solutions or some ideas other than just asking for more pay. Although my daughter will be the first to tell me that you don't get paid enough, and I understand that. But boy, you know, we could give you all the money in the world, and it's not going to solve all these problems. And so that's certainly looking at some solutions, and happy to chat with you about any ideas you might have. So thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I guess the little soapbox there.
Senator Lang, may I respond to that?
Please do.
So Senator Marie, nicest for the record. Senator Titus, thank you for sharing that. As an educator, I hear it, what you're saying, because I also am a grandparent to children in the Clark County School District. Our educators are fearful for their safety as well, and that's also a reason why we're losing educators, because there is no accountability, there is no follow through with what is happening in our classroom. So that's something we face. How do I keep my students safe, but how do I also keep myself safe? I have a family that I'd like to come home to every day. I worked with an educator who was threatened by a parent because the educator was following school policies and explained it to the parent. The parent said, "Tomorrow I'll be here with a gun." So those are the things that we're facing, and that's why educators are leaving our profession. So yes, we definitely need to come up with solutions, because all of these things negatively impact our students. Thank you.
Senator Buck.
Thank you, Chair Lang, and thank you for your presentation. It was very thoughtful. I agree that teachers need to be paid more. We need to go up more to a little above average so that we can recruit talent. With that said, I know you had mentioned that there are Title I schools that are doing it well. Have you been able to go out and see how they're managing their budgets well? How they're performing with the same amount of dollars as the rest of their counterparts with Title I students?
John Bellardino for the record. If you're asking Senator Buck if there's examples and do we know of those examples firsthand, yes, there are. They're far and few between, though. And I want to say this about the Title I schools. I mean, it's a challenge because our highest vacancies are in those schools, and the vacancies contribute to the carryover dollars. It's the salary attrition, right? So if you're compromised from the word go, not having not only enough staff, but effective staff, it's going to have, as you know, I mean, you were very successful in what you did, it will compromise the outcome.
If I may, Chair. So how will giving dollars back to Central end up helping those students in schools? Because I remember as a building principal, as you mentioned, in a Title I school, close to 100% free reduced lunch, that your budgets are very volatile from year to year to year. And so you could all of a sudden lose a couple of staff members if you didn't kind of plan accordingly. And so, and kind of have that foresight to see, because all of a sudden a pandemic happens or something happens that there's not enough revenue in the state and your budget goes down. So I can see why they're doing that. I would hate to go back to the time where we're about use it or lose it, where you're just spending dollars, because I can remember that also. And that wasn't necessarily the most efficient for the school site that I was at. So I'm sure that there's a balance there, but what are your ideas with that?
John Villardita for the record. Senator Buck, to be crystal clear, we are not advocating 1 penny of carryover dollars going back to Central. That is not what we're proposing. What we're proposing is that those carryover dollars be put some kind of guardrails, and I'll explain what I mean by guardrails, around the carryover from the previous budget year so that it's used in real time in the current budget year where you have that additional money on instruction, right? So what are the guardrails? I think it's fair game to find out how come there's this much money sitting there. And it could very well be that some principals don't quite know how to use it, right? It could very well be they've been told they can't use it a certain way. I don't think it's a uniform answer in every building, but I think the guardrails would say, boy, if you're in a Title I school and you have proficiency levels below 40% for reading, then you're going to be spending X amount of that money to try to increase those proficiencies. And here's some of the programs, and I cited them earlier. We have evidence where they've been successful. Reading centers, for example, or tutoring or mentoring or programs like that. That's what I mean by guardrails. But to be clear, we are not advocating 1 penny go back to Central. The carryover dollars are students' education money, and it should be spent on instruction, but in real time as much as possible. And that's why we're advocating in the year that the carryover is there.
Sorry about that. So better results, greater autonomy. So the ones that are doing it well, even though they're few and far between, I would like to see guardrails around them. Because if they are performing on potentially less money because they're saving it for whatever that rainy day is, how would you feel about more dollars for high-need areas? High-need special ed, core subjects. Again, we want our students, before they go to middle school, to be reading and doing math. Having, I think I mentioned it in last education committee, 110 African-American boys in 8th grade pass the proficiency in math is appalling. And I'm with you on that. How would you feel about more pay for those high-need areas?
John Villardita for the record, Senator Buck and the rest of the committee. So we think we're at that moment in time where we need to distinguish salary compensation. So there should be a differential compensation for high need areas, whether it's a particular school or whether it's a particular subject matter or whether it's a particular student population. We're game on trying to explore moving the needle on that. But pay alone is not enough. We think that there needs to be this surround sound support system. You know better than anybody, or at least between you and I, that somebody isn't going to just go to a school that has a lot of challenges because they're going to make some additional money. They want to be successful. So money is part of it, right? But also the support system in there. Does that school need additional counselors? Do they need social workers? Do we need a robust type of professional development that provides the type of support for that very unique and challenging student population that that school has? That's what goes with it. And so we believe that there should be a differential pay system in place for those hard to fill, difficult schools, difficult positions, et cetera, but a support system along with it.
Okay, so You had a slide on the relief dollars and how there was hundreds of millions of dollars left that still hasn't been spent. Can you tell me how long they have to spend that amount of money and if you have an impact on where that money's going?
So I think you should bring back school districts and ask them that, or you can bring back the Department of Education because that data is coming from the Department of Education. How they can be spent, that's really an interesting question. When we showed you the slide and the money that the school district used on lost learning, we said 40 cents on the dollar was on lost learning. Well, when you take out the money they spent on textbooks, it turned into 20 cents on the dollar was for lost learning. So there are guidelines, there's Fed regs, as well as the state has adopted some, as to how that kind of money can be spent and a timeline in which it should be spent. I think the education agency should be here before you explaining that. But I would strongly advise that if you were to do that, that you be supplied with the type of information to ask the type of questions that have to be very detailed to get the answers you're looking for.
Okay, is there anyone else on the committee that has questions? Senator Neal's not with us today, so you'd have a plethora of questions. With that, I want to thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate you making the trek up here to Carson City and oh, Senator Donate has a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I couldn't end today without asking one question. I know during the interim, some of the folks in your organization have been working on a workforce report. Do you have any updates to share on that?
John Villardita, for the record, thank you for the question, Senator Donate. Yes, so I want to give some context to this. We approach this legislative session differently than in the past. In the past, you would have seen or heard CCA advocating, we need more money, we need more funding, all that stuff. We think the COVID experience, the shutdown, the manufactured shutdown of our economy, coming off the heels of the crash that occurred in 2008, coming off the heels of the 9/11 experience in the state of Nevada, clearly, cried out for, and people, latched onto this, that we got to change the economy, right? We got to diversify the economy. Well, what does that mean? We're approaching the education discussion this time differently. We're saying that education is an integral part of the economy. And if we don't see it in that context, we're never going to improve the economy and we're never going to improve the education system. What do I mean by that? It is the delivery system of your workforce for today and tomorrow. So we did extensive research, or we had Columbia University, for example, and the University of Nevada in Reno, do research around if we were to try to improve workforce in this state, how would we do it? There's going to be a piece of legislation that's going to be introduced in this session. It's going to be introduced by Assemblywoman Shea Bacchus that essentially is going to say, let's create a teacher pipeline. And the difference this time is the role of the state. And we're asking that the state integrate the delivery system of K through 12 to higher ed and match that to emergent industries in the state of Nevada. In other words, so we know what kind of workforce we need, and there is an integration between K through 12 and higher ed. With the teacher pipeline, we're proposing that in each and every high school in Clark County, for example, there's a teacher academy run through the CTE program, where there's at least 100 students that are enrolled in the first year, right? And they're given an opportunity to complete a 3-year program, get dual credit, 12 credits, that a college or university in this state will acknowledge and accept as enrollment into higher ed, school of education, graduate, from them successfully, have their tuition abated if they go back and they teach in the public school system. We're focusing on Clark also to build the whole diversity around this issue, okay? And going back to Senator Titus' question about getting parental input, we're proposing that this process involves the parent and the student when they're in ninth grade in high school, where they're sat down with a counselor and they can see over a 7-year period, 4 years, 3 years of CTE in high school, 4 years in college, a career at the end of it, and a job in a school district, right? But that the parent has to sign off on that with the student. And if we do that in all 49 schools, the diversity of that influx of participants is going to reflect the teacher of tomorrow. So we're using the teacher pipeline model as an example of how you can build a pipeline for other workforce, for other jobs that a different economy that we currently don't have can produce. That's a long answer, but you gave me that opportunity.
Now we have another question.
Thank you, by the way. I appreciate all of you always making yourselves available to work with us in the interim and having had an opportunity to sit down with you prior to this meeting. I wasn't going to ask a question because I feel that often the answers are not necessarily with you, but really focusing on the school districts or talking to the superintendents. But I do think that you obviously have very unique perspectives. And as we're trying to untangle what we want to accomplish this session, I think maybe you could put yourself in my perspective and help me kind of understand it through your lens. One of the things that I've often been hearing about, particularly since the interim, but now it's a very prevalent conversation in this building, is talking about students being out of control. And we get a lot of perspective. I've gotten phone calls, emails from teachers who give me very specific examples of what is happening inside of their classroom. And then we've all seen the horrible news of some of the horrific things that some of our teachers had to go through just last year. I say all that just to say that I'm sympathetic to that. And I'm trying to weigh, how do we have a safe classroom environment to where you wake up and a teacher never has to even contemplate the idea of their life ever being at risk? With the notion of when a child is not in school, if I am acting inappropriately, if I am constantly disrupting class, and I am no longer in that classroom either because I'm expelled or I'm removed from that setting, through my lens as a legislator, I am now navigating what that individual child can mean to society. Because sometimes the unfortunate reality is that classroom is the only thing, even if they're disruptive, they're not paying attention, they're getting in the way of everybody else's ability to grow. That is the last, I want to call it lifeline for that child. Because the moment we remove that child from that classroom and we put them to fend for themselves, because often, as Senator Titus has alluded to, the issue is that there isn't a support mechanism at home. There isn't a checks and balances. There isn't accountability. You remove that child from that setting. Now we as a society have to address a question of what that means for us 10, 15 years down the road. So I'm always trying to reconcile one with the other, where we can say we go back, I'm using the word going back because some folk have had that conversation with me, said, you folk have made a mistake, and I'm referring to legislators, said you made a mistake in moving towards this direction of keeping children in the classroom constantly, of making it more difficult to expel students, et cetera, and then just going kind of down that argument. And so when I look at that conversation, I then go to the other side. Well, what's the other side of that? And so maybe you all could provide because I know you have these conversations constantly. And some of the things that maybe you often see legislators are skipping in the conversation and or ignoring or not taking into account. And again, this is not you have to have the right answer. I really would like to just engage in that exercise. I think all of us could benefit from it.
Thank you, Senator Flores. Marie Nices for the record. As a former elementary school teacher, the issue is we need to start when they're young, when they are in kindergarten. There are not enough support systems for our students to change that behavior, to change that trajectory for that student. I have seen kindergarten students who have harmed their educators. They're little guys, but they still hurt their teacher. Whether there was one teacher who the child tried to stab the teacher with scissors. Luckily, it's kindergarten scissors, so there's not a lot of damage that could be done there. Another one was actually knocked over, and she has to have physical therapy regularly. Those children are in crisis mode. I absolutely agree with you. We need to provide intervention for those kids so that they can be successful citizens. But if we don't have the wraparound services to help provide that support, it's impossible. When I came out of the classroom, I was a literacy specialist and I did reading intervention. Our kids act up because they are behind. I was just one person with high needs kids who are in 5th grade working at a kinder or 1st grade level. I'm not a miracle worker. They should have had interventions well before that. They should have social workers who can deal with the emotional well-being and the things that they're going through at home. They should have more interventionists to make sure that Johnny is reading at grade level by 3rd grade. I cannot make a child be prepared for 4th grade if they are working at a kinder or 1st grade level. They will make gains in my classroom. However, by the time they get to me in 3rd grade, it's really too late. We need those early interventions. Our high school educators agree with that. I have a board that sits 14 other educators on that board with me, and a lot of them are high school teachers. They agree the interventions need to start when they are young, because by the time they get to high school, it's almost too late for many of our students. Thank you.
John Bellardino for a record. Senator Flores, I want to make something very, very clear. So the first thing is, we are not in favor of having a student removed and denied an education, okay? A student that crosses the line, is violent or whatever. There has to be an alternative. What got passed last time, I have no doubt that it was done with the best intention. The legislation, whether it was AB 168 or some other. I think the people that working behind it were trying to do the right thing for the reasons that you cited. There is a tipping point, though, where there is a moment where that student cannot be in the general population, right? And it doesn't mean that that student is denied an education. In the past, we had behavioral schools. What Marie was citing was just a total breakdown, a lack of support systems, very early as well as throughout, particularly when they become young adolescents and they're flexing, right? But there is a moment where you have to create a culture of deterrence, that there is a degree of behavior that crosses the line. So we don't particularly have the answers on it. We know that issue is going to be addressed in this session. We're going to be, advocates for solutions on that. But I do want to make clear the two things that I started with. We do not think that a student should be denied an education because they have behavioral issues, even extreme behavioral issues. But at the same time, there is a tipping point where that student can no longer, for their safety, other student safety, or staff safety, be in the general population. Permanently or temporarily, I don't have the answer to that. I will say this. We had a teacher, a young teacher, a minority teacher, in a tough school, a Title I school, who was brutally raped by a student. And when that occurred, CCA invited legislators to come to that staff school to hear directly from those educators what that experience was. And what they heard was just general safety protocol that should be in place, that the school should have. Behavioral issues and no support or staff to deal with behavioral issues. There was no condemnation on that student that acted out that day. There was no quick jump to let's get rid of these kind of kids. We wanted lawmakers, at least those that came, who were part of the last session, to at least hear the experience of violent behavior. That teacher is no longer a teacher, will never come back to this profession, and it scared the hell out of every one of those other educators in that school. So there is a tipping point where you have to have a culture of deterrence there, where you just can't have that kind of behavior, violent behavior, in with the general population. Permanently, how long? I don't have the answer for that. I hope that gives you some insight as to where my organization is coming from on this. We want to approach it with a teacher opens up her classroom, kids come in, they close that door. What's in that classroom is the world's problems.
Okay. Marie, thank you so much for representing educators. And thank you to each of you for being here today and telling us a little bit more about what you see as the solutions and how we can be helpful. Because as we go through this session, I tried to schedule these presentations early on, so as we make decisions moving forward, we can think about what you said to us and what others said to us, and hopefully make great decisions for our teachers, our educators, our students, and make our education the best it can be in Nevada. So thank you so much. And with that, I'll open for public comment in Las Vegas. Public comment in Carson City.
Good afternoon, Chair Lang, members of the committee. I am Patricia Haddad, and I am the Director of Government Relations for the Clark County School District. As you well know, the greatest indicator of a student's success in the classroom is a skilled educator delivering rigorous grade-level content. This is true for every student in every district in Nevada. The Clark County School District is committed to supporting students and educators through a myriad short, medium, and long-term initiatives that improve learning and working conditions. You've heard a few different numbers and figures related to student achievement and use of funds today. I look forward to also providing the committee with some follow-up information and accurate data based on the discussion that has occurred today. And I'd just also like to add that at this moment of a potentially unprecedented investment in education, we agree with education stakeholders across the state. System-wide accountability is key if we are to transform education in Nevada. And we must align as a state, as stakeholders, on a common definition of accountability that extends to every corner of the education delivery system, classrooms, schools, districts, and state entities included. And we do look forward to continuing this conversation with all stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblywoman De Silva, I just wanted to recognize you and thank you for being in our Education Committee today. Any more public comment in Carson City? On the phone, oh, come on, please come.
Good afternoon. My name is Alexis Alexander, for the record, Alexis Alexander. I'm an elementary education major at the University of Nevada, Reno, and I'm here for the Association of Students of the University of Nevada, Reno, ASUN, Day at the Legislature. As an education major, I was excited to watch this committee discuss how public education can be improved in Nevada. I love my field of study and cannot wait until I graduate and fulfill my aspiration of teaching. Even though I love my major, with teacher pay being so low in Nevada, I worry about being able to to bear the cost of living on a teacher's salary on one day. Teaching is not an easy job. I also worry about experiencing burnout. Education is my passion, but I find myself already just feeling discouraged knowing that I am about to enter a difficult field. I appreciate this committee's effort to remedy the challenges that public education faces, and I invite you to bring student teachers to the table for these conversations. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you. BPS, is there anyone on the phones?
Chair Lang, to provide public comment, please press *9 to take your place in the queue. Caller, you're unmuted. Please begin.
Hi, this is Anna Binder, ANNABINDER. I want to begin by saying today I'm attending individually, but as many know, I'm also the vice chair of the Special Education Advisory Committee, as well as an appointed member to the Governor's Behavioral and Mental Health Advisory Committee. So I just would respectfully ask that as a community, we need to have a separate discussion of behaviors and safety, notwithstanding. On June 13, 2019, CCSD agenda items 4.01 and 4.02, the CCSD trustees took away the policy section of student learning. This took away all accountability for student success. A whistleblower complaint was reported in 2021 as a violation of NRS 386.365, and nothing has been done. In the past 18 months, NDE has worked to bring forth receivership language, but it was voted down at the very end of its life because, in so many words, they thought that it would not bring a better working relationship between the state and CCSD. We were also put on notice last year that we were in violation of family engagement activities, and I know that the state has been working towards this. The state has also attempted to work on language to bring forward additional policy and guidance for schools to spend carry forward funds, and we need that leadership. Just a few years ago, we gave CCSD $18 million for its human capital management system, and as of today, the system is still deficient and cannot be used as intended. After the principal buyout in CCSD, many principals were handpicked by the superintendent, despite some schools having full operating SOTs. SOT voices have been muted or completely bypassed, which directly affects school cultures and climates, as also evidenced in the teacher testimony presented by Ms. Nisi earlier. The grading reform policy, also brought forth and passed, has been detrimental to student success, and it only benefits numbers for any evaluation, and it puts an undue burden on our educators. We need to be creating the environment to let teachers teach. Our current governance policies in CCSD
Ma'am?
have been crafted over the past decade. Yes, are we done?
You're at your time. I'm sorry.
Okay, you got it, no problem.
Thanks so much for being on the phone. And with that, I want to again thank CCA for being here, and Alexis, you are our future. And with that, we'll adjourn the Committee on Education until 1 o'clock on Wednesday.